Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's joining us this evening. It's wonderful seeing all of you. And if there's a bright spot with COVID, it's that these streaming events are allowing more people to engage and participate in events like this. And we get to see people not only locally, but from all over the country, even from Minneapolis, which I'm delighted about. So welcome to my Minneapolis neighbors. This is the largest gathering we've had in a long time, and we're just so excited to have you here tonight. And I just also want to do a shout out to the new mayor of Mendota Heights, Stephanie Levine, who has joined us as well. Yay, Stephanie, thank you for joining us. Anyway, I don't want to take up a lot of your time. We look forward to a wonderful evening, and I'll turn this over now to Sharon Pessis, who is the Women's Director and Campaign Associate at the St. Paul Jewish Federation.
Second here, there. Thank you, Ted. As he said, I'm Sharon Pessis, and I am Women's Director and Associate Development Director at the St. Paul Jewish Federation. And on behalf of all of us, I would like to, again, as well as everybody else has already said, welcome to our 4th annual International Challah Bake and our first ever Zoom Challah Bake. There are approximately over 200 people that have registered for this tonight, so we're looking forward to getting a large group here. I should also mention at the end of the evening, David will announce the winner of our door prize. And the door prize is a gourmet dinner for 2 at Fhima's, and it's provided by David Fhima. Everyone who has registered tonight is going to be entered into the contest, and he will announce the winner at the end of the evening. Just a little bit about David. We're thrilled to have Chef David Fhima showing us all how to make his mother's challah recipe. He has trained with chefs all over the world, but says that his biggest influence is still his mother's own recipes and his mother's cooking. I'd like to call on David Fhima, and let's get the show on the road. And thank you all for being here tonight.
David, you have to unmute yourself. Hold on.
Yep.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that. As you have said before me, and much better, this is a new way of baking, a new way of cooking. It's a new reality. So with all the bumps and bruises that we are having, one of them is learning technological things. Both of my daughters, the youngest one, are in college. So it's mom and I, the older generation, trying to figure out all this technology. So bear with us. With them here, this would have been so much better. Having said that, I am privileged and honored to share a lot of my mother's cooking, a lot of my mother's wisdom, and my father's. And a little bit about us. This is Angelo, who is an incredible baker. And this is a proof of what baking and what cooking is all about. It's really it's a art. It's about feeling, it's about touching, it's about caring. And if you don't have it, it's very, very difficult to get to the next level and make things better. So you do not have to be technically trained. You do not have to be going to schools. You just have to care about what you put in your belly, that it's good ingredients. And while you're doing it, you are hopefully helping local farmers. While you're also doing it, employing really good people. While you're also doing it, giving back to the community that supports you. And I can't think of we've done literally hundreds of Zooms throughout the pandemic. And this is very special because OCHT, which the St. Paul Jewish Federation helps a lot and is involved with, is really an organization that has helped me and has gotten me from the depth of being a hoodlum to hopefully being a decent human being. And depending on who you talk to, maybe they tell you I'm still one of those. But it's an organization that is that goes and helps young Jewish kids, and actually some who are not, to get their life in order. I went to L'école Ort in Strasbourg, which is funded by the Jewish Women Organization of Ort. And Strasbourg borders Germany. And I remember being kicked out of different boarding schools in my career, in my youth, and finally went to this school. I'll spare you the whole long story. And Monsieur Loeb, which is the director of the school, looked at me, and I can't remember his image. I can remember this incredible, gigantic man with these huge eyebrows and the tattooed on his hands, concentration camp numbers, looking at me and says, "No Jewish kid of mine is going to fail." And got my life together. So for me, fast forward many, many years ago, I won't tell you how many, to be able to give back a little bit, I wish I could do more. This is nothing. But that's all there is about that history. We're going to be baking challah. So just a little couple technical things that I want you to think of. Temperature. And when I say temperature, it's not necessarily the temperature of your oven alone. It's the temperature of your house. Your environment really matters. Moisture. So bread can be easier to make when it's humid and hot, but can also be tricky. It also can be easier to make when it's dry and cool, like a night like tonight, but it also can be tricky. And I want to explain to you the two things. So I don't know what temperature you have at home right now. And some of you may have a temperature that your bread is going to love, and some of you may not. So we're going to go through that process together, and I promise you, it will work out perfectly. The third thing that I want to make sure you really do and do well, if you are in a bad mood, if you're not happy, either get a scotch and change or get out of the kitchen, because your bread will fill you. Your dough will fill you. My mom used to say that when you are happy, your pores get this sweetness that comes out of them. And when you are sad, it gets this bitterness and it goes in your food. So I'm a firm believer that who you are and at that moment really is going to be reflected in your challah. Having said all that, we're going to start making our challah. And yes?
Question, do you need a KitchenAid mixer or do you need by hand?
So that's a great question. Somebody asked if you need a mixer or you need by hand. You can do both. The recipe that we've given you, it says on speed 1 or speed 2, and you can do it in the mixer. I am old school. Everything that we do in our baking is done by hand. I mean, we make all of it by hand. I want to feel it. I want to touch it. I want to be less between me and the ingredients. However, not everybody can do it. And sometimes you're making a lot of challahs.
Yeah, a Scotch brand. Larry wants to know a Scotch.
Oh, a Scotch brand. I'm a big fan of Lafroy. I love that it's all about Scotch right now, so it's good. Maybe we can put some Scotch in our caramelized onions and give this challah a little bit of a different flavor. Lafroy is a good Scotch. Maybe, I don't know where my Scotch is. But so we're going to go through this process, and we have a good 60, 70 minutes to do this together. It's the easiest thing that you can do. So before we start, the last thing I want to tell you, cooking is about your sensory experience, your sense of smell. Smell first, look second, and that will tell you what the taste is going to be like. Baking is a science. The measurements matter. How much of it you put together matter. So when my mom made this challah, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and it literally took me 10 years to figure out what a little bit of this and a little bit of that was. And so we perfected that. The second piece is that there are different starters for the challah. There is your yeast. There is what we call starter dough. Most people don't have a starter. This is a special announcement, and that's my surprise for you. We are going to share our starter with you if you want it. So if you do want it, you just email the St. Paul Jewish Federation, make a great donation, and we'll give you our 130-year-old starter. This is the starter that I brought with me in 1983, a little jar that my mom gave me, and she got it from her mom, and we feed it, and we feed it, and we feed it. We are not going to do that with the challah tonight, although that's how we make our breads, fresh yeast starter. We are going to do it with a dry yeast. However, I will explain to you the techniques of making it both ways. So we're going to start, and we're going to make the challah, and I'm going to follow it step by step by step, slowly. So I brought the rock star in here, so he's going to start doing the mixing, and as we talk about it, and I will discuss what you can substitute for, including discussing, a gluten-free challah. What is a gluten-free challah? But I know there's a lot of people who are sensitive and all that stuff, so we're going to talk about that. So first thing first is you want to take your yeast and have it become active. So the recipe calls for 3 tablespoons of dry yeast. And we're going to do that. So we're going to go slow on this process. And it also calls the recipe. Now I know how to do this by heart, but it calls for 1 cup of water for 2 challah. So we're going to do half a cup of water. And we don't want the water cold. We also don't want it warm. We want it at room temperature. We don't want to activate the yeast too fast, and we don't want it to activate too slow. So half a cup of water. I hope everybody can see it. And we're going to add it to it. And what's going to happen to your yeast, especially dry yeast, it's going to crumble a little bit. And you're going to go, oh my gosh, what's happening to this yeast? Don't worry about it. It's going to self-dissolve. All you need to do is mix it a little bit and don't cover it. Okay, let the room temperature take care of it. How do we know when our yeast is active? So you have dry yeast, which is what we're using right now, and we have fresh starter dough. The fresh starter dough takes a lot longer, and it's a much more difficult, and when I say difficult, it means in terms of time to wait. The dry yeast is very, very quick to be active. If your dry yeast doesn't activate within 3 to 4 minutes, that means it's dead. Throw it away. Look at the expiration of your yeast. That really matters. If you open a bag and you close it back and you put it in the refrigerator thinking it's going to be good, most likely, unless you use it within a few days, it is not good. And that is really, really critical, because if your yeast is dead, your challah does not work very, very well. Actually, it doesn't work at all. You're going to wind up having a very dense challah. And if you follow our recipe, which incorporates honey, which can incorporate sugar, sugar helps the glutens, salt reduces the glutens. And you can see right now, can you come out here? Can you see it? It's already starting to bubble and activate, and it does it very, very quickly. So our yeast is activating. We are now going to mix all our ingredients. So we're going to start with flour.
David, there was a question in the chat about the recipe was for 2 chalot. So the question is, do they do the same?
I'm making 1 right now.
Okay.
Yes. And the reason I'm making 1 is as we've made a bunch of them actually today, and you're going to be able to see them, is because we want to be able to go through. We're going to go through the process, and we're going to come back again in case something didn't work for you. We want to make sure that you master the art of a challah. You're going to be the best. With all due respect to all the challah bake-offs you've done, you're about to experience challah but I'm biased. I'm like every son of a Jewish mother who says she's the best cook ever. So I can't tell you otherwise. So we're gonna do, thank you for the question. That was an important question. So we're gonna do 4. So this is our ingredients.
There was another question about how many packets of dry yeast is 3 tablespoons?
You're gonna take a tablespoon, a soup spoon, and you're gonna measure it flat. It's also, each tablespoon is half an ounce. Does that make sense?
Every package is different.
And so what I want to make sure that the packaging on the yeasts are, in terms of weight, are very, very different. And depending on the yeast that you, a little bit of piece of trivia, we never used to use yeast. Yeast is a modern agricultural mistake, in my opinion. Sorry. It was invented by Louis Pasteur, a French scientist who said, okay, how can we make this thing act much faster? He also invented pasteurization, which is what is used in milk, in butter, in cream. So where you sort of warm things up a little bit so they don't go bad, so they don't have bacteria. Well, back in the day, that was fine because we didn't have any refrigeration. But right now that we have refrigeration, I'm a big fan of real cheese, real milk, real all that stuff, but we can't do it. So I hope we get to it one day. So I'm gonna get the rest of my flour.
Do you weigh the flour to get the exact amount, or do you use
Yes,
a measuring
this
cup?
was already weighed. Yeah, the flour was already weighed. Everything I have is already weighed, and it's weighed exactly to the right measurement.
But for people at home, should they use a measuring cup, or how should they do it at home?
So the recipes that you have right now, which are the recipes that we've shared with you, it says 8 3/4 cups of high gluten flour. So that's what you use. So this is a cup, this is a cup. So be also very careful. Volume and weights are different. Do not substitute one for the other, especially in baking. Does that make sense? So we have our flour. Now your recipe says mix everything together and go on speed 1. If you have a blender, if you have a mixer, we're gonna do this by hand. When you do it by hand, you're gonna make a hole inside. You're gonna make a well. Most of you probably make bread at home. In that well, we're gonna put all our ingredients. So we're gonna start with the salt, which is 1 1/4 tablespoon. We're gonna go with our sugar, which is right here, 2 1/4 tablespoons. You also have measuring gauges that says tablespoons or teaspoons on them. We are gonna go with our eggs, 3 eggs.
While you're doing that, there was a question about the different types of flour. People were having a challenge getting high gluten flour. What's the difference between some of those flour?
So I am so glad you asked that question. So the first thing first, do not ever use enriched flour. Do not use bleached flour. You need to use high gluten, unbleached flour. What is bleached flour versus unbleached flour? Flour is never meant to be white. The grain is naturally brown. And the way they would turn that grain from brown to white is that they would have these huge warehouses. The roofs are open and the sun will sort of like shines on them and they keep turning them and that naturally bleach them. Well, we know that takes a long time. It takes months. And so they came up with a modern way to do it, which is with chemicals. And that's really, 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 really bad. It's bad for you. It also causes gluten sensitivities. So to me, high gluten, unbleached, unbromated flour is the best flour to buy. And here's the other piece that about flour that's extremely important that you need to know about is that the amount of gluten that's in the flour will dictate how your challah is going to rise. So if you get a baking flour, that's not going to work. You need to get a bread flour. You cannot also get a pastry flour. You need to get a bread flour that is very high on the gluten. What we're also going to do right now, as we do this, is we want to try and activate that gluten. Gluten is your friend, but it's also your enemy. But we're going to get back to that in just a second.
Can you do this without eggs?
Can we do this without eggs? Yes. Except that if you do it without eggs, you have to substitute, instead of eggs, you have to substitute a liquid, the same amount of eggs to water. Does that make sense? The second thing is that the challah is going to proof faster because egg is a fat, and fat does not allow the challah to rise as quick. The less fat in the challah, the more it will rise, and it will rise faster. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question? So this is great. We're going to go slowly and gently. We have time because this is what's waiting for you. You know, I could be really cruel right now, take a piece and eat it, but I'm not going to do that. So we have our flour, we have our salt, we have our sugar, we have our eggs. We are now going to add our honey. And if you do not want to add honey, you don't have to, but don't substitute it for anything. It doesn't need to be substituted. Do not add more sugar to substitute for honey, because if you do, you will collapse your challah.
So David, there's a number of questions about, again, the difference between the ingredients for 2 chalot and 1. So when you're making for 1, a major question is, how do you have the number of eggs?
So 1.5 egg.
Okay.
So basically everything gets halved in terms of the amount of egg, the amount of product that you're making. It really is a very simple procedure to do it. So let's say 8 tablespoons obviously becomes 4 tablespoons, 8 but I'm going to show you, and this is going to answer that question probably even more if you bear with me, what happens once everything is mixed. And it's going to answer that question specifically for you. And this is really very important. And this is why we decided to make a bunch of challahs, so we can show you what happens as well throughout this whole process.
But with the one challah, it's 1.5 eggs. You just eyeball it.
So yeah, you eyeball it for sure. Now, the major ingredients in your challah is the flour, the water, and the yeast. Those are the major ingredients. Those are the ones that you have to be careful with.
Can we mix active dry yeast and fresh yeast?
Yes, great question.
And what proportion should we mix it?
So it's dry yeast is 2-to-1 to fresh yeast. That means if I have a tablespoon of dry yeast, I'm going to be using half a tablespoon of fresh yeast. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Here's what happens also with fresh yeast. Fresh yeast is almost the equivalent of a starter dough. It's going to take a lot longer to rise. Keep that in mind. A lot longer to rise. So we don't make anything with dry yeast. We make everything with fresh yeast and starter, but we've made these because not everybody has it. And this is what the result was. So it works, and we're going to do it together, but it also is a different science in terms of how the bread is being made, but it works just as well, and it works just as fine. The only element that is important to know between fresh yeast and dry yeast Here's what happens to bread when flour hits water. There is a chemical reaction. It releases sugar. That sugar starts to hit the gluten. That's how the bread rises. If you take flour, if you take water and mix them together and not add any yeast or not add any type of yeast and knead them a lot, the more you knead that flour, the more you develop the gluten. And let it sit, which what we call a cold rise, overnight, it's going to develop its own yeast inside. And it will rise a little bit. Because think about it, yeast is really, what is yeast? Yeast is flour and water that are mixed together, that are let to sit at room temperature. We mix them, the sugar develops, we come back the next day, we feed it a little bit more flour, develop a little more sugar, and we create that starter. That's how my grandma and my great-grandma and great-grandma did it. That's what makes it 130 years old. So it's not this really, we just figured out how to take that mother dough, that fresh yeast, dry it out and make it into this dry yeast that activates extremely fast. And so as you do that, what happens to that bread when you introduce to it, a lot of people who have gluten sensitivities, they have it because modern bread making is not allowing the bread to rise properly. It's speeding that process. And the faster that process is, the more gluten it develops. And then you become sensitive to it. You're not supposed to be eating that gluten. You're supposed to be eating bread that is healthy, where the gluten is literally 80% of it is gone after it's been rising for a day or two. Our bread was featured 4 years ago on Dr. Oz, and they took our bread and they tested it. And they realized that our bread was literally almost 80% gluten-free, even though we use regular everything. Because what we did is we allowed the bread to sit overnight in the refrigerator. And as it does that, it eats that gluten. It eats it up and it eats it up. And it develops a great bacteria, which is almost like eating yogurt. It's a probiotic bacteria that's really good for your gut. So one of the healthiest things that God gave us, we sort of messed it up by trying to make it too fast. So I'm going into something that I firmly and passionately believe in. That's what my mother baked her bread. So if you want to make this as a bread that rises over, you can still do this and you can make it, but as opposed to let it rise at room temperature, put it in your cooler and let it rise overnight, you'll have a much healthier bread the next day when you are baking it, because it eats that glutens out. I hope this makes sense, and I hope it answers how gluten work, how yeast work, why one is better than the other from a health perspective.
How much liquid for egg substitute?
Except the same amount. So the same amount. So if you are not putting eggs in your challah, you substitute the same amount of eggs to it. 3 eggs is usually half a cup, so you do half a cup of water. So far, so good.
And is it 6 tablespoons of fresh yeast and 6 tablespoons of dry yeast, or what is the proportion?
So on your recipe for 2 challahs, it says 6 tablespoons of yeast. Correct? That's dry yeast. So if you were going to substitute that, you're going to half dry yeast and half fresh yeast. You're going to have 3.5 tablespoons of dry yeast and 1.5 tablespoons of fresh yeast, because fresh yeast is 2-to-1 to dry yeast. Does it make sense?
So if you're doing all fresh yeast, it's 3 tablespoons.
Yes. Make sense? But it's less yeast, but you're going to have to let it rise a lot longer. And we're going to talk about bread rising. There is a science to the art of bread rising. because what happens when we making bread, a book says let it rise for 30 minutes, let it rise for 40 minutes. We are giving you those instructions. It's a rule of thumb. It's not a science. So we're going to talk, how do we know when our bread is ready to bake? That is a critical component. We're not quite there yet. So we have flour, salt, sugar, eggs. And we're going to add our honey. We're going to add our butter. If you do not want to do butter, you substitute the same amount of butter for extra virgin olive oil. The fat on this bread matters. And I have extra virgin olive oil, and we're going to talk about olive oil in just a second. And this is grass-fed butter, which has much more omega-3. It's better. It acts in the bread with the gluten better. It develops really good, wonderful probiotic. And my milk. So on the milk, did we measure this? So on the milk options, I'm going to follow the recipe right here. So it's 3/4 of a cup. I mean, it's half a cup. Yeah, almost 3/4 of a cup.
David, we did have a couple of questions having to do with the use of milk, given a lot of people, have meat meals.
Yeah.
So I thought I would put that out.
That's absolutely. You substitute water for it. Or you can substitute what I call a flavor neutral product, like almond milk, soy milk. Soy, as it bakes, you can taste the flavor. I wouldn't add coconut milk because you will taste it. Your bread will taste that, unless you're planning to make a beautiful coconut challah and then have a coconut French toast. But I will really try and stay away to a more flavor neutral. Almond milk, when it bakes, you do not taste the almonds. Oat milk, I wouldn't do. Oat milk. Oat milk is very nutty and really will interfere with the growth of the challah. So we have all our ingredients in here. Now, we also have onions, caramelized onions. So I'm going to do this challah without it, and I'm going to do challah with it. Okay? So we'll get back to the onions. The caramelized onions that you have, how do you caramelize onions? It's half a cup, which is basically half an onion, half a white onion. You take a little oil, you saute the onion, you caramelize it, and then you let it sit till it's cool, and then you add it to the mixture. We're not going to do this challah with the onions today. We're going to do it without it, but we also did one with it, and we're going to explain that as well. So we have all our stuff. If all of it is in your mixer, do not use the whisk, use a paddle. Okay? Does that make sense? We do not want to whisk it. We do not want to introduce air in the challah. We want to beat that challah. We're going to do this. So in the first, and we put our recipe for things to go in the mixer because most people are comfortable with it and like it, and actually it makes for great bread. If that's what you're doing right now at home, perfect, go for it. Everything is in there except for your yeast and water. This is a two-step process. We're going to mix the bread piece without the yeast and water together gently. Yeah, and use your hands. We're going to wash his hand. Once we do that, we're going to mix it a second time, a little bit harder with the yeast. Why are we doing that? If we take this yeast and water and introduce it into the challah right now, before we incorporate the salt, the sugar, all the ingredients into the challah, it will break down the yeast. The yeast will become inactive. By mixing it without it right now, we are keeping our yeast intact, and we are using the flour that's in there and the gluten to kill that chemical that the egg, the sugar, the salt, the butter, and the milk are going to release. Mostly kill it so it does not affect my yeast and water. By doing that, I am able to really keep that yeast intact and not hurt it. If you can see right here how my yeast is, can you guys see it? So, and you'll see all those clumps are pretty much gone, and it's all bubbly. You will also, so bubbles and the activation will tell you, but you also, if you want to know when your yeast is ready, you smell it, and you will smell like a rotten apple. I don't know where I got that from, but that's what it smells like to me. So you see right here, we just mix this and it's going to be crumbly. Now we're going to add, so is everybody doing this at home? Is everybody cool with it? Can we keep going to the next step? I want to make sure that I follow you as opposed to you following me. Does that make sense? Can I go? All right.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Beautiful. So we're going to take these right now, and now we're going to go harder, and we're going to mix it and mix it. While she's doing that, while Angelo is doing that, and Lori is taking the video, I'm confused. I think about my wife all the time, so it's always a she. So the piece in here that's very, very important, you mix all your ingredients except for your yeast that has been active. That's the number one thing you do. Then you add your yeast that has been activated. You're going to have a little bit of a slight, a slight wet ball. It's better. A slight wet. And what we're doing right now is, because of its wetness, we're just going to add a little flour to it. If I had the exact amount of flour that this needs from the get-go, you won't be able to mix it properly. The fact that this is a little bit wet, it allows me to mix it better. And all I'm trying to do is try and get it to a point when it's not wet anymore. If you can feel the moisture, then you need to add more flour. And you shouldn't have to add more than probably a quarter cup of flour at the most. This is good.
Yeah.
So we're gonna mix it, keep mixing it. And once it's mixed, we're gonna let it sit for 30 minutes so it proofs. Correct? Nobody's challenging me on that? I know I have only experts, so how can you be on a Jewish call and nobody's challenging you? So,
if you're using a handheld mixer, is the speed the same?
And no, so the first speed, you go on 1, the second speed, you go a little bit faster. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because now I'm not worried about killing my yeast. My yeast is going to be fine. So, yeah, a little bit more flour. So
How do you recommend we caramelize our onions really quick? I'm behind.
You're behind? Well, you got to get
I'm
off.
caramelizing.
No, just kidding. No, what did you say? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
How do you caramelize the onion?
How you caramelize onions? Really easy. You take a saute pan, okay? And what kind of oil do you have at home?
Walnut.
Walnut oil. That's great. Do you have olive oil?
Of course.
It's a tricky question. Are you going to saute the onions with olive oil?
I was thinking of sauteing in walnut oil because I'm using walnut oil as my oil for the challah.
Okay, but that's why you're doing it. So let me just stop you guys first. How many of you cook and love olive oil? Probably all of us. Please stop cooking with olive oil. It is not meant to cook with. It is meant to flavorize your food. The most toxic thing you can do to your body is to get the oil at a temperature that's higher than 90 degrees centigrade. It breaks down, it becomes very toxic. That's why, so my mother's side of the family was Spanish, my father's side of the family was Italian, and my grandmother would, at the end, when she made pasta, she would season it with olive oil. Olive oil is what you make dressings with. You never saute, you never caramelize with it. What you saute and caramelize with, walnut oil is a good one because that's called a high smoking point oil. So it's an oil that allows it to get very, very hot before burning. You do not want the oil to burn. So you're going to take a saute pan. You're going to hit your saute pan first. You're going to put a tablespoon of walnut oil, half an onion, and you're going to caramelize that onion. Once the onion turns brown, you lower your heat and you keep mixing it till it becomes brown like this. And that's probably going to take you 15 minutes. We're going to try and wait for you a little bit, but we don't have all night. So speed that process up and put your stove on high. Are you cool with that answer? Are you good?
Yeah. Everything except don't wait for me. Don't even bother waiting for me.
All right, so you see that challah that we just made? This is the one before it that has sat for 30 minutes. So
Start out the same size?
It's the same, but
why do we do that? Why do we let it sit? It's really very, very important. I can take this right now and work with it and create a challah without waiting for those 30 minutes. I can do that. But what's going to happen, that 30 minutes that I have is really important for it, not to really proof, but for it to sort of incorporate into each other. So when I'm rolling it, it's not brittle. When I'm putting it together, all those ingredients are not falling apart on me. So while we do that, in here,
Where do you want it in a warm spot?
you find a warm spot in your kitchen, you keep it uncovered, and you roll it. So we're going to talk. I am doing this with dry yeast, so I'm giving it probably 20, 30 minutes. All I'm looking for is not for it to proof. I'm looking for it to be pliable and manageable. That's all. I don't want it to proof, because if it proofs, I rather see you work this dough sooner rather than too late, because then you will roll it and you will collapse all the ingredients. So we made our challah. Out of this, we're going to get 3 strings. So we're going to talk about that in just a second while this is happening. But before I do that, I just want to make sure that everybody at home and everybody that's making challah has that challah working right now. Any questions on that? Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to get rid of all these ingredients, and we're going to talk about what is right now happening right there to what's happening in here, and how we're going to roll this, because we're going to do this together 1.5 times, well, two times.
So David,
Yes,
Kate said that her roll made with dry yeast was a little bumpy after kneading and put it into a ball. What's wrong if it's a little bumpy?
Does it look like this?
does it look like the one that Lori has right there? Can I see it? Good idea, let me see it.
That's Kate Garland.
All right, I'm trying to get this to work. I apologize. Working on Zoom.
Let me see it.
That looks great.
That is perfect,
Are you sure? Okay,
yes.
okay.
The reason
Thank
it's
you.
like, it's supposed to be like that. What's-
Okay.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to explain, and that's really is such a good question. Mine is probably bumpier than yours. Okay, this is what it's gonna look like.
Okay,
Okay, but you gotta let it sit for a little bit.
okay, thank you.
Okay, that's when all that stuff. But we're gonna do something really, really cool. We're gonna make it without letting it rest, and we're gonna make it after it has rested for 30 minutes. Okay, so while yours is resting, we're gonna make one right now that was resting for 30 minutes. So I have mine. I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna cut it in 3 exact pieces. So if you want to be, if you have OCD, get a scale and measure it. If you are an artist, please don't weigh it, just eyeball it. And I'm going to tell you why. It's better to eyeball it. Each one of these strains is a different size. It's not exact. It's not done purposely. We just eyeballed the strain. So, and here you have the thing. Can I have this, please? Thank you. So you can see we eyeballed it, and we're going to cut it right now.
David, if you can also address when you would add the onions. People have questions about that.
How much gluten-free flour should you use?
We did not talk about the gluten-free flour, did we?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so your gluten-free flour is going to have a very, very hard time. Did you already mix everything?
No, not yet.
No. Okay, so for your gluten-free flour, you're going to do 1.5 times the amount of yeast.
Okay.
Okay, your gluten-free flour, depending on what gluten-free flour, which one do you have? Rice flour? Do you have tapioca?
Rice tapioca mix.
Which one?
Tapioca.
Tapioca. Okay, tapioca is better because it does not require as much water, but it's going to require more water than the recipe I gave you. Now, I think what you need to do is you're going to have to keep all the measurements exact that I've given you, including of the flour. But what's going to happen, the only 2 things you're going to pay attention to, you're going to double the amount of yeast, and you're also going to not put salt in your gluten-free flour, because we want salt is going to collapse the yeast. So we want to try and help that bread, because what helps the bread rise is the gluten. Since we don't have any gluten, we're going to try and form our own gluten. So once you do that, double the yeast, don't put any salt. You're going to mix your dough, and then you're going to find out that your dough is a little stiff because the lack of gluten and tapioca flour requires a lot of moisture. So you're going to add a little water to it till it feels a little bit, because it's going to be hard, till it feels a little bit softer. Once it feels a little bit softer to you, then you're going to take a little salt and you're going to sprinkle it on top of the ball. just a little bit, not the same amount. I would say 2 or 3 pinches of salt. And then you're going to let it rest. What we're trying to do is not introduce the salt inside the bread, but have it outside of the bread. By not having it inside, we're going to allow the bread to rise up nicely for us. Does that answer your question, sweetheart?
Yeah. Thanks.
So go, I want to see that gluten-free challah out there. So we have 3 of our pieces right here. Do you guys see them? And I want you to see how Angelo and I are going to roll these, and how we're going to shape them. I want you to look at my hand. What you want to do right here, you see these tips right here that I'm developing right here? It's not an even. I'm developing tips. Can you see these tips? You see that? And you're going to put, and I'm keeping my tips right here, and I'm not overworking it. It's really very important. If you overwork it, you're gonna hurt your glutens in there. I'm only rolling it and having little tips. You see that? Does that make sense? All right, so we're gonna do these 3 right here, and we're gonna shape this dough that has been waiting for around 30 minutes since we started, a little bit over studying the class. And we're going to form it into a challah. So we're going to go very slow on this process. So how many of you make challah at home? I assume a lot, correct? How many of you do 3 breadings instead of 4 breadings instead of actually 5? Probably a lot. So we're going to do 3 breadings. So we're going to do a crisscross first. And then the next one, go ahead. So follow me. Straight, these 2 right here are parallel, and this one is in between. You roll it right there. So this one goes in, then stretch this one. Yep. Stretch it out again. Stretch it out again. And then close it right here. So now hold on. Now we're gonna flip it. Go ahead. Flip. Yep. Do the same thing again. Go ahead. Slowly. We're gonna do this again, guys. And we're gonna close it. Yeah, we're gonna flip it one more time. Yeah. So look. So right now, what we're doing, this is very important. We are rolling each challah, each length into each other. Yeah. A little trick: put your finger in the egg wash that you have, and right here to close it up. We're going to take these. We don't need it.
No, we don't need it.
I'm going to talk about someone had a question on other olive oils.
Yeah. So we're going to.
Or other oils.
So I'm going to leave it right here, and I'm going to let it proof. And
Oh my goodness.
so this, after I did that, this is what needs to come up. Can you see it? So we're gonna talk, we're gonna drink, we're gonna eat until we get to this point. And then we're gonna bake it. So we're gonna do that. So while that one is proofing, we're gonna take this one and we're gonna brush it. There are 2 schools of thought. Yeah, in a second. There are 2 schools of thought. Egg washing once you roll it, and then egg washing it before you bake it, which is called a double wash, or egg washing it once. I want you to try it both ways. We're going to do it both ways, and I want you to see which one you like the most. All it does, it doesn't change textures, It doesn't change anything. It only changes colors. So you see how he's gently working it?
Can you do this without eggs?
Can you do the challah without? Yes. So if you don't want eggs on the challah, you can do it by taking a little oil and brushing it with a little oil, not extra virgin olive oil, just a high smoking point oil. Otherwise, that oil is going to burn on your challah. So a little trick, if you have 2 ovens at home, you preheat your oven at 350 degrees, and the other one, its neighbor, that's where you put your challah proof. And now you have a beautiful proof box. If you don't have that, and it's cold inside the house, and in the winter is very challenging for the challah, then you just put it next to your stove, turn one burner a little bit out there, and let that heat go on. Our challah is egg wash. We're going to bake our first challah. 350 degrees, low. If you have a fan, low fan, not high fan. If you don't have a fan, you probably want to go to around 360 degrees. Now, here's the deal with ovens.
10 minutes and 12 minutes.
Yep. So here's the thing with ovens. Every oven is its own capricious self. So know your oven, know how your ovens work, and that will tell you and play with it, and you'll find out the right temperature. For us, this is going to be at 350. So we're going to put it 350, 10 minutes. So on the instructions.
David,
Yes.
Carolyn says that her oven has a proof setting. Should she use it?
Yes, absolutely. Who are you? I don't have that, and I'm a chef. So I'm going to put this right here. We're going to go right there. We're going to forget about that challah for a second. So on your recipe, it says before proofing, brush dough with half egg wash, mixture above. Let dough proof cover for 30 minutes. That's a double wash. We're going to do that to the next one. I wanted to do one simple, and we're going to do it. And after proofing brush, bake for 350 degrees for 10 minutes. And then we're going to rotate it and rotate the pan and bake it for another 10 minutes. It might take us 20 minutes. It might take us 25 minutes, but it shouldn't take us more than 30 minutes to do this. Our first ball right here. I'm sorry.
Okay, Chef.
Yeah, our first ball that should be steamed for
If they're
10.
using a convection oven, what temperature should they use?
Convection oven, you want to drop the temperature by 10 degrees. And you want to have it on low. Does that make sense? Because the convection oven, because of the fan, it distributes the heat much faster. And I'm not in your house. I don't know what your ovens look like. You know your ovens. Besides your significant other, the best relationship in your house is your oven. So you get to know that oven. Clean it up, pamper it. It will be precise for you. So if you look right now at our challah, which is almost 20 minutes, it's ready because my house is a little bit warmer because of all the activity in it today. Who is not at this stage right now? Good. We're going to cut it. And we're going to make challah, the challah that we did together. So we're going to do it again, except that this time we're going to do the double wash. And we're going to look at both colors. So while this is being cut and rolled, he's going to show you again nicely. Take your time, Angelo. These people want to just see your beautiful hands rolling that bread. a little flour on the bottom so it doesn't stick. You won't affect your bread. You see that? Second one.
Second one.
I'm looking at my watch, not because I'm looking at the time, but I'm looking at my timer for my first rotation of the challah. So let me know, honey, in 6 minutes. So here's what's going to happen to your challah sometimes, and here's how to fix it. Can you come right here, honey? I want you to see how smooth this is, how not smooth this one is. Can you see that?
Exactly.
Okay. Make sure that the ones that are the smooth ones are on the outside, and the one that's not smooth is in the middle. As it collapses, it's gonna have two sides that protect it. But do not make the mistake of over-rolling it. You do not want to do that. You do not want to reknead it. You do not want to do any of that stuff, because you will collapse your challah again. You want, it will work perfectly.
No, I mean, for that, we need to wait for 30 minutes.
Yep. Yep.
You wait for 30 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
And that also tells
Yeah, we
you,
can work with it.
yeah, this is going to give us a beautiful challah.
Yeah.
That also tells you that you did not wait long enough. Because if you wait, the flour, water, and the glutens, they collapse into each other. So they start this way, and they gently, with time, they keep going together and they bond together. So the more time, I'm sorry?
Was there a question?
Was there a question? All right, so we're gonna need this one together. So remember, 2 parallel, 1 underneath. You wrote, stop. So do not make the mistake of going like this. Your challah will get screwed up. Go ahead. So you want to go one strain at a time. Actually, I think this challah is going to be phenomenal. All right, so somebody had a question about olive oil. So not all olive oils are created equal, as you all know. A good olive oil is going to have 3 rules that the manufacturer applies to it. It will come in a dark, it will come in a very dark bottle. It will stay gently pressed without any heat. And it's going to be certified as an extra virgin olive oil. There is no other olive oil to buy. Now, if a small amount of very, very, very good olive oil will go a long way in making your food very nutty, very, very tasty, very healthy. An inexpensive or a light olive oil, you're going to need a lot more of it. That means you're consuming more calories and you are having an oily dish. It's literally, it's worth all the money that you can get to buy a really good extra virgin olive oil. Partana is one of my favorite. I don't sponsor anybody, but it's also olive oil to me is like a preference. So we are doing an egg wash right now. before the proofing, and we're gonna do another egg wash once the challah has proofed. This to me is gonna probably proof very, very fast.
Great, Chef.
Yeah, so right here, my first challah is ready to rotate. You can see that. We're having challah in our house for the next 5 days. So, we have one challah baking, a caramelized onion challah proofing, and a third challah proofing. One has a single wash and one has a double wash. The essence of this bread, and I want to just recap this for you, is that the yeast, the introduction of dry yeast after you've kneaded the first ingredients is really important. You cannot do it in the beginning. You got to do it once you mix all your ingredients, then you got to add your yeast and water. That's extremely critical. If you do not want any eggs, you don't want any butter, you don't want any milk on that, you can replace milk with water or almond milk or soy milk. I don't recommend oat milk. You can substitute butter with extra virgin olive oil, same exact amount. And as far as honey, if you do not want it in there, don't substitute anything. You don't need to have it. So you technically could have a kosher challah that doesn't have any dairy in it, or you can have one. And you know, everybody, unless you don't eat dairy, I challenge you to make one with dairy, so you can do a French toast with it, so you can do a peanut butter, jelly, and butter with it, and then one for Shabbat that you can eat with meat if you are eating kosher. You can do both. You literally can do both, and you can do them both at the same time. This is why I wanted to split the recipe in two, because it was really very important that you understand that if you wanted to make two challahs, one that was dairy-free and one that was not, that how to replace and substitute the ingredients is really not very difficult. The only one that you do not want to substitute is the honey. You just want it eliminated. I hope that makes sense, and that it tells you what I was trying to think about. As I'm trying to talk to you about the challah, I'm also trying to make sure that I think of the possibilities of making these at home. And we're doing this in our home. This is my house, which I'm happy to have you spend the evening with us in. And it's really very important that you see we have ovens just like everybody else. We are working with the same equipment like everybody else. It was also important that we don't do it with a mixer. I wanted to take the least common denominator in making a challah and have you do it. Your hands, dry yeast, oven. And as you make it more and more and more often, you will find out how much better it gets. And once you become an expert at it, you will come back. 6 minutes? Yeah, I just turned it. Yeah, it will. The life will come back, and you will make that challah. It will collapse, and you won't know why. And if you called me, I wouldn't be able to answer that. It happens. Bread is very capricious. Flour is very capricious. Yeast is very capricious. It relies on temperature. It relies on moisture. But if you do all the things properly and you do them often, most likely than not, you're going to have a really very good product.
How long in the oven?
I'm sorry?
How long in the oven?
So the oven right now, we have, I think the recipe is 20
What brand of honey should we use?
I'm sorry?
Brand of honey.
What brand of honey should we use?
I love that question. First of all, don't use anything but raw honey.
Okay.
Okay? So the brand doesn't matter. Make sure it's raw, it's unpasteurized. Make sure all there is in there is that raw honey, and try and use, there are many local farmers in Minnesota that have honey, which is really, they grow their own beehives. We use a lot of that honey as well. Try and use that if you can.
Can we use maple syrup?
You can, if you can use maple syrup, yes, but you're gonna have to use half as much. Maple syrup is a little bit sweeter. Your bread is gonna taste like a little bit like maple, which is awesome to make French toast with, but it also has a lot more water in it than honey. So you do not want it to collapse. So as a rule, if you are substituting something, don't do it 1 for 1. Do it like, unless you know for sure, and you try to do a little bit less, and then you can add more. Once you've mixed, if you have too much, it's really very, very hard to fix. Because one of the common mistakes that a lot of
Battery's running low.
I'm sorry,
Sorry.
that's okay. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. One of the common mistakes that we make in baking is that we fix things with flour. You can't. A little bit, but if it's too wet, and if it's a little wet and add flour on the outside, that's perfect. But if your dough is soggy, you can't fix it with flour. You're gonna have to really over knead it. But you can fix things with water. It's just a little harder. If you add water to your dough that's very, very dry, it's just, you got to be very careful. You don't want to over knead it too hard and kill the glutens and the bread doesn't rise. Does that make sense?
David, there were a couple of questions that I thought we would get to. One is, somebody indicated that theirs was a little more yellow than yours. Do you know what would cause that?
The type of flour, what flour are you using?
I don't know.
Our challah is ready. Shabbat shalom. So I want you to see the color with my first wash. And I want you to see the color that it's going to have. So I think a perfect challah is a challah whose crust is chewy but not hard. This is not sourdough bread. Okay, it's very, very important. So, and I'm going to come to those questions if you give me 1 second. As soon as your challah is ready, have a screen. If you don't have a screen, get one from your oven. You know, in your oven you have these, one of these, like a rack. But whatever you have, get it, because the enemy, you've worked so hard, you developed a beautiful challah, but you know what that challah right now is doing? It's so hot, it's sweating. It wants to take all of that off. You do not want it to take it off in the pan. You want it to be right here so that sweat comes from underneath and it's not moist and soggy on the bottom. Does that make sense? Let's go to the questions.
So another question was, can you freeze raised challah?
No, not raised. So you can make the challah like we just did and immediately freeze it. But before you freeze it, you got to do one thing and one thing that's extremely important. You take a little toothpick and you poke few holes in it, wrap it really tight so there is no air or moisture going in it, and then freeze it. By poking it with those little holes, it will allow whatever gas is in it while it's freezing to escape slowly, as opposed to freezing and then the inside of the challah, the gas stays inside. Because if you do that, when you take it out and you let it thaw out and let it proof, it's gonna burst. It's gonna have these little bubbles. It's gonna, you know, that happens to us sometimes. You do not want that. So by poking it a little bit like that, you will eliminate those bubbles. But if you've raised it, you cannot freeze it. You're gonna have a really terrible challah if you do that.
There was another question about length of time in the oven. Somebody with their oven was still preheating as you kind of moved forward. So how long should it stay in the oven?
So the challah, 10 minutes at 350, rotate it, another 10 minutes at 350, and you're done. That's it.
Perfect.
Does that make sense?
Yep. And then of course the other question that people always have is, do you ever put poppy seeds or sesame seeds on it?
Yes, of course. But here's how I do it. I mix them in my egg wash. And then I wash with them. If I don't mix them with my egg wash, you know what happens to those sesame seeds and poppy seeds? They burn. But by letting them stay in the egg wash, I moisturize them a little bit. So as the challah is baking, they don't burn. And I've had beautiful challahs, but you can taste some of that poppy seed burn and you go, oh, such a beautiful challah, and you can mess it up that way. Rosh Hashanah, my mom used to put, she would do this whole thing, and then she would put an egg inside the challah. A raw egg, a whole egg, washes it inside and puts it in and as the challah bakes, the egg literally becomes hard boiled. It's really a Sephardic tradition on how to start the year and stuff like that. And I used to love eating that egg. For some reason, that egg tasted better than any other hard boiled egg I've ever had. I don't know, it's because I had to search for it in the challah, but it really tasted really good.
Okay, there were two more questions, and then
Sure.
I think we need to move on because we're getting towards the end of our time. So do you put a pan of boiling water in the oven to add additional moisture?
No, because what the pan of water, and that's also an excellent question. What the pan of water does, it creates a crust. That moisture is for the crust. We do not want crust in the challah. We want a nice coating. Sourdough bread, baguette, I'm going to add water. That's absolutely right. But on challah, brioche, so the great cousin of the challah is the French brioche. What we did in here is incorporate the brioche into challah with the eggs, the butter, and all of that stuff. If you want it to be classically challah, you take the butter out and the milk out, and you replace them with olive oil and water. Does that make sense? But to your question, what was the question again? The moisture, you do not want to create a crust.
Okay. And then, of course, if somebody wants to bake it tomorrow for Shabbat, what should they do? Should they freeze it, put it in the refrigerator?
Here's what you would do. You're going to roll it. You're going to stress it. Braid it. And immediately put it in the refrigerator. And let it, what we do, you're going to have what I love to do, which is what's called a cold rice challah. And when we talked about this, Sharon, in the beginning, I said, I hope a bunch of people don't bake it tonight. I hope a bunch of people, put it together, put it in the refrigerator, cover it so it doesn't dry, and tomorrow get it out. What you're going to do is you're going to have that gluten develop, and it's going to develop this incredible flavor. The reason sourdough develops that sourness is because it takes time to rise, and it takes time for that gluten to be eaten. When you have honey, and when you have butter, when you have milk, and you let it sit overnight, you have that umami, that all your senses, you have the sweet, the sour, the sugar, the salt, everything is coming together. So please don't bake it tonight. Don't proof it, just roll it, shape it, and refrigerate it. when you get it out tomorrow, egg wash it, and then let it proof till it doubles in size, and then egg wash it again and bake it.
Excellent.
Okay.
I think that's all of the major questions that we haven't touched on at the moment.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Of course.
What's the purpose of braiding from the middle?
I'm sorry?
The braiding of the challah, you braid it from the middle, you start it in the middle, then you turn it around and braid it the other end.
That is, thank you. I wanted to talk about that, and that's an awesome question. Because when you braid it from the middle, you can gauge the end. When you braid it from the end, because the act of braiding, if you start at the end and you come to the end, you're going to have 3 uneven ends because of how you're pulling it out. By braiding it from the middle, it allows you to control the length of your ends and thus coming together really nicely. Otherwise, you're going to have a shape on the bottom because of 3 ends that are different that's going to make it like this little ball out there. Does that make sense, sir?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So someone they were letting it rise for 30 minutes, but they want to use it tomorrow. Is it still okay to put in the fridge?
Absolutely. Yes. So if you, one of the questions we have, somebody let it rise, they're going to bake it tonight and then use it tomorrow. Here's a trick that the French invented for fresh bread made 3 days ago. You take a bottle, a spray bottle. Before you bake your bread, you spray it with a little water and at 300 degrees, any bread. You moisturize it and you bake it tomorrow, and you will really need an expert to figure out that the bread was made 2 or 3 days before. You just spray it with a little water and moisturize it, but make sure that your temperature is not 350 because you're not baking it. All you do is introducing moisture to it and finishing it off and at 300 degrees.
So
Two quick questions. Number one,
Yes.
Is challah safe for animals, pets, dogs? And then the final one that I see here is challah on the menu at your restaurant?
Yeah, well, so here, yes, we make our burgers on a challah bun. We make our merguez on a challah bun. We put challah on challah and we create a challah sandwich. I love that bread. Eating is an emotional thing, and it brings a lot of memories. And so every time I smell challah, it reminds me of my childhood. It reminds me of my family. It reminds me of my own values as a Jewish chef. So it's really, yes, it is on the menu, and yes, we cook with it a lot. Unfortunately, we make pork sliders on it, which is sort of a sacrilege. But we do use it. What was the other question?
I think that was the last one. Onions are not safe. Somebody said for pet consumption. Yeah, the other question was about for dogs.
Yeah, it has very little onions in it. So our 15-year-old dog, which just passed away a month ago, was raised on halal, and so there is one final thing. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to be on them. One of the great Sephardic tradition at halal. So we would sit down at a table and we're eating halal. We never cut it by hand. We pull it, and my dad will throw it, and everybody catches it. And because at a funeral you cut, at a wedding you throw. It's a festive thing, and it was part of it. So Zazu, which was our dog, was one of the guys where he learned how to play catch by catching the halal every Shabbat on Friday. And some of it had onions, some of it didn't, but he survived all of it. So I'm not saying what you should do with your dog. I'm just telling you what we do about ours.
Right, right. Well, I know that we're coming up against our time. So how do you want to bring this to conclusion, David?
I'm sorry?
So we're running up against our time.
Yes.
Obviously, if people want to stay, I'm sure you're willing to answer questions, but sort of to wrap up.
Yeah, well, first of all, if you have any questions, Sharon has my email address. You can just, she's happy to share that email, send them over. We're happy to do it.
I have the
Yep. 2 is, it was a privilege. I could be talking about Challah for the next 4 hours. I won't. I'm like my dad, and I keep hearing him in my ears. Storytellers, we love to eat, we love to talk, and we love to tell stories. And so having you in our home was truly an honor. Thank you so much. But we do have a winner, and we have a winner for that dinner. And I think Sharon told you a little bit about that dinner, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. So that's not a dinner.
Wait 1 second, David.
Yes.
I'm gonna, in a minute, you can talk about the dinner, but then I'm gonna call on Linda Perry, who's gonna say goodnight to everybody. And then she will tell you to announce the winner.
You got it.
Okay?
So
So
absolutely. So the
Okay.
dinner is a 3-course meal. Whoever is going to be announced, you will call us, make arrangements. We will ask you just one question. What are you allergic to? We do not want to know what you like. We do not want to know what you don't like. We just want to know what will kill you if we made it. And then we're going to make you foods that you haven't had before. We're going to challenge your palate. It's going to be 3 courses, and we're going to wine you and dine you. And that's what the dinner is about.
great. All right, Linda, you ready? Are you there? Linda? Where's Linda?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, absolutely.
You can see me, but can anybody see me? No? All right, if not, just let's. I'm Linda Perry, and I've been on this committee since its beginning, and tonight has been phenomenal. I am representing the planning committee, Lexi Dockman, Lauren Goldberger, Lindsay Bloom Horowitz, Emily Paper, Sarah Rice, Amy Kaufman, Sandy Lowenstein, Leslie Strom, Sheila Broad, and Janie Kirschbaum. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I hope you all had a great time and made wonderful challah. I really appreciated David's Sephardic traditions, his memories, and his incredible expertise, and all his little hints and his talent at telling us what not to do, and it was just wonderful. Again, we have a door prize, and David, you want to give the winner?
Yes, happy to. Neil Foreman.
Oh, nice.
And we have a couple announcements up on the screen right now. December 2nd is a cooking event. And also David Fhima is going to be at the Sholom's Food for Your Soul on November 12th. And Saturday night, there is a post-election Havdalah. And I want to thank everybody for being here and enjoy your challah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Angelo.
Thank you, guys.
Please, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your restaurant's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you a lot. This was wonderful.
Thank you, David,
Thank
for
you.
all of your insight.
Wonderful.
It was great.
We need to thank Lori and Jackie for help with the event also.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And I forgot, but Sharon and Jeff and the staff of the Federation for making this wonderful event.
Oh,
It
thank
was
you,
our
Linda.
pleasure.
Make it possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Jeffrey. It was awesome.
Thank
And
you.
every year we say next year in Jerusalem. How about next year together?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely.
From your mouth to God's ears.
I hope he's listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask you one last question?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm making this challah in Los Angeles, California. Jeff Travis is my brother. So, and this is our first challah bake of the evening. We have our school challah bake next, so I'm gonna have a lot of challah. It's braided and it's risen. Do I cover it with plastic and put it in the fridge?
No, if it's risen, you're gonna have to bake it.
Okay, I will be baking it then.
Yeah, the only time you let it rest is before it has risen.
Thank you. Great recipe.
David, may I ask one last question?
Sure.
Fantastic, thanks. Do you put cornmeal on the bottom of your challah or any of your breads, and how would you apply the cornmeal?
I don't. The only time I put cornmeal on any of my breads, if the breads are like a baguette, sourdough quality, a hard crust bread. Otherwise, any bread that, as a rule, if it has fat in it, you put parchment paper. If it has no fat in it, if it's what we call a dryer bread, then you want to put the cornmeal. And the way you apply the cornmeal, which is a trick that I learned, you apply the cornmeal to the bread, not the pan, because it will allow you to put very little and your cornmeal won't burn.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Again, David, thank you. Thank everyone else who helped you. This was amazing. Looking forward to making it.
Thank you so much.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Looking forward to baking it with your starter.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Ted.